This is The Weekly Set, an official podcast of TheTotalScreen.com.
I wish I was the monster you think I am.
You have come here to beseech me?
Can't. Yes. For your soul.
Madness can be a medicine for the modern world.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Weekly Set, the official podcast of The Total Screen. I am your host. My name is Tyson, and joining me today, as always, is my partner in crime here at The Total Screen, William Rohrig.
Hello.
So, today we are doing episode 263. We are recording on July 15th, 2020, and we are going to be talking about an old series. I think it's over 20 years old now. That's crazy.
Jesus Christ. Yeah, when did this first air?
1999, so it's 21 years old, I think.
Wow.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking about space. So those who don't know, if you've ever watched the movies Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, The World's End, if you've seen those three movies with Simon
This has nothing to do with those.
Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright and all those people. Well, this show is from the same people, basically. So Simon Pegg is in this show. Nick Frost is in this show. Edgar Wright directed every episode of this show.
Yeah.
So this is like where their collaboration started. It's not part of that trilogy in quotation marks, but it is like where that collaboration started, basically. And it's a British comedy series. It's ran for 2 seasons, each one being 7 episodes long. We're going to be talking about season 1 this week. Next week we're going to be talking about season 2.
And if you watch the movies, there's some neat callbacks to space. Like in Shaun of the Dead, there is a scene where they basically run into their counterparts. And it's funny because Sean's counterpart is the actress who played Daisy on Space.
Yes.
And that's if you wouldn't get it if you didn't see Space, but if you watched it, you would see that's a fun scene where they're playing up a sort of semi-reunion.
Yeah.
But so little things like that, if you enjoy those movies, I think watching this will enrich your enjoyment, because there's a lot of Easter eggs like that, peppered throughout those films.
Definitely. And another thing that's just makes watching any kind of British comedy series good is that Britain, or the UK in general, is a small country. It's a small area. It has a small population. We know a lot of British actors, but the actual pool of actors isn't that large. So
yeah,
you see a lot of people in a lot of the same, different projects.
Yeah, if you start watching a lot of British television or films, you start seeing a lot of the same actors and actresses kind of over and over again.
Yeah, a big one in this one is the guy Brian. He plays the artist in the show. He's in tons of stuff. He's virtually unrecognizable from the way he looks in Space in most of the other stuff, but he's in so much British comedy, it's ridiculous. And there have been times where I didn't even recognize it was him for a second, and I'm like, oh shit, that's Brian from Space. So he's just in a ton of stuff. He was in The World's End. He was when they got to the last bar and the one alien guy was greeted them or whatever and was talking to him, that was Brian from Space. Looks completely different, but that's him, so there's of course the ones you're going to recognize mostly from this are going to be Simon Pegg and Nick Frost. Tim and Mike.
I saw Simon Pegg reposted a meme on Twitter where it showed 3 pictures from The World's End. It was basically one of the pictures was the alien, and I think it said who you think is the villain, and then the second picture was Simon Pegg's character from The World's End, and it said the villain, and then the third picture was just a picture of a pint of beer, and it said the actual villain.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
That was pretty much the story.
Yeah, that's pretty much the story, yeah.
So that's Space in its legacy, in the sense of what ended up kind of coming from Space. So that tells you a little bit about that. One thing I will say to anybody who's going to start watching Space, as we did mention, it's over 20 years old. It's pretty dated now. I was kind of taken aback. Like, I'm like, oh yeah, 90s fashion. I remember that. Like, his pants are loose, you know,
90s,
things like that.
He's playing PlayStation all the time. It can't get more 90s than that.
Yeah, like the kind of the geek topics that they're talking about are real, like, kind of surface level, like Star Wars and stuff.
Yeah, it's like Star Wars and stuff, and it really like one of the things that impressed upon me is like it really feels dated now, because I'm sure like back then, like in the late 90s, I think like nerdy pop culture references were like in mainstream media were like so uncommon as to be noteworthy, but now we're kind of like we're living in a culture where we're constantly like saturated with it now. Like everybody's just dropping like fucking references, Star Wars references, or like Marvel references, to a point where like when you see like them make like a reference in this, it no longer stands out as something that's unique. But
at the time it was like something only geeks would get, and now it's something that's so saturated in the culture that anybody would get it.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It makes it feel almost like, you know, when you watch a show that tries to be nerdy and it's like only getting the surface level shit, and you're just like, oh, come on, you're not actually nerds talking about this shit, you know?
Right.
And that's kind of what it feels like, but you have to take into the context that this is 20 years old.
Yeah.
So at the time that they were making these references, these were obscure references.
Yeah, these, like the Scooby-Doo reference was a pretty obscure reference.
That was great.
Back in the 90s. Yeah.
I love that reference, the music, the whole moment, and the fact that you didn't even notice it, that Simon Pegg's character was dressed like Shaggy the whole time. And the only thing that really set it off was the moment where Daisy took off like her sweater or something and then had the glasses fall down from her top of her head. And that's when it clicked. Like, that was so great.
Yeah, that was so great. It's full of great moments. It just like impressed upon me. Yeah, it didn't age very well, but it's not the show's fault. It's just like popular culture kind of went in the same direction that Space was kind of going. And so it's kind of like that's what happened, and that's why Space feels a bit dated now.
Yeah. It wasn't ahead of its time. It established our time or something in a way. It was one of the shows that helped establish the language of cultural jokes and stuff that we have nowadays. Kind of came from shows like Spaced.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's more of that to come. There's like things that have been constantly ripped off or parodied in commercials and other things from Spaced that are like, I know in like season 2, there's one really big one, like an imaginary gunfight thing. It's like a huge moment that's been constantly parodied or done in other things now. And when Spaced did it was crazy and new and really hilarious and funny, and now it's like something you've probably seen a million times. But that's not Spaced's fault. Spaced did it like first, you know? It's just that it's a 20-year-old show. So those references, I think it may be like if you watched Monty Python right now, you'd be like, oh, I've already seen all these jokes before, you know? But like when Monty Python came out, it was like a revolution.
Oh, yeah.
Because nobody had done that kind of stuff before.
Oh, I mean, I watched Monty Python when I was a teenager, and I could not believe that was from the 60s, because like if you compare it to American comedy at the time, or most of the comedy from like the 60s, like nobody was doing anything even close to what Monty Python was doing.
Yeah. That's exactly. But if you went in watching it as if it was a new show now, you might feel like, oh, like this isn't really special or something, but that's only because everybody's already copied them. Yeah,
that's because like that kind of like Monty Python, like radical comedy is like, again, it's like commonplace, because you had stuff like Adult Swim came along and stuff, and they, you know, a lot of people have started doing a lot of that absurdist style comedy, you know, that was, at least when I was growing up, was pretty rare. That's why I globbed on to Monty Python so much, because it was there was nothing else. Even when I was a teenager, there was not a lot that was like that.
That's right. Will was a teenager in the 60s.
I was a teenager in the 90s, and the 90s were, for the most part, for the most part, growing up in the 90s, TV was still very conservative. derivative.
The 90s is always, I think, when we started getting, we're on a tangent now about Monty Python stuff, but I think the 90s is when the Monty Python comedy stuff started breaking into America, really.
Yes.
Because that's when you got stuff like from Canada and America. It hit Canada first, but the Canadian stuff started coming to America, like Kids in the Hall, for example, or The State, and it was one in America that kind of comedy was very Monty Python-esque. So that stuff started hitting in the 90s. It was still kind of obscure in the 90s, and then it started getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And now you watch something, like I said, you watch a Monty Python now, and it doesn't necessarily, like, if you don't take context into consideration, it doesn't feel like it's something that special, but that's just because it was so revolutionary that everything copied it and borrowed from it and was inspired by it and influenced by it, that it became like the shoulders that everybody else stood upon, you know?
Right.
And I wouldn't say Spaced is as big as Monty Python, but it was a very important cultural show.
I don't think necessarily like it wasn't like it's not a Monty Python situation with Spaced where like it was influential. I think like pop culture was just going in that direction anyway, and Space just happened to be, one of the first there to it just because of Simon Pegg's, own like kind of nerdy sensibilities,
I don't know, because Spaced was the start of both Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright's careers, and the two of them can be directly attributed towards a lot of the direction that pop culture went in. I think stuff like Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz and stuff were very influential in film for that stuff, and that stuff wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for Space.
No, well,
so I think I don't think it's as influential as Monty Python, but I think it definitely was influential. And it's just, like I said, like there's stuff in this show that just doesn't feel like a big deal now, or you've seen it already before. Like you feel like, oh, this is something I've seen before. But if you take into context that it's 20 years old, it kind of shows that like, oh yeah, you've seen it before because this show did it. And others copied it,
Right. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. And so I watched it and I thought it was amusing. I could see what it was doing, but I wasn't like bowled over by it. And I guess that's part of the big reason why is because it doesn't
feel so dated.
yeah, it doesn't, it's not so unique anymore.
Yeah, it feels very dated. Like it is. I mean, it's an old show now. It's weird to think that, think about this. When this show originally aired, if you went back 21 years from there, we'd be talking about like 1979, 78.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was born in 79. So like if you go back, like that's the crazy thing. So if you think like we're talking about Space now, Space came out 21 years ago. If you went to when Space came out and went 21 years ago from then, you'd be talking about like when like I was born, and you were born somewhere around there too, right? So
I was born in 81. So
yeah, exactly. So like we'd be talking about before you were born if you went back again. So like that's a crazy thing to think of. That puts in perspective like how old this show is now, that like this is like it would be like if when Spaced came out we were talking about, I don't know, Cheers or something, or something even older than Cheers. It would be like if we were talking about that at that point, it's like that shows you kind of how old it is in that context, that we're talking about something that came out 21 years ago. But I guess to kind of catch people up who don't really know anything about what Spaced is, it's not as high concept as something like Shaun of the Dead or Hot Fuzz or anything like that, because it starts off, it's just basically a story about two people that find each other because they're both looking for a place to live in.
Yeah,
they both, for different reasons, end up like having to leave their current place.
I mean, it's a sitcom, and I think the basic story is just a flimsy excuse to get these characters together, and the rest of it just kind of plays off of how these characters interact and the kind of like situations they get themselves into. It's pretty. It's pretty
that's
typical.
very 90s, like what's your show about? It's about a bunch of people living in apartments in a building that are friends. You know, that's that's Friends, literally.
Yeah,
that's what
It's
that's
literally
Seinfeld,
Friends.
basically. You know, that's, it's some people and they know each other and they're friends, and some of them live near each other in apartments, and you just kind of in their lives when they're in their apartments.
I mean, the basic conceit is that like they're renting an apartment together and they're posing as a couple because for some reason this landlady only wants to rent out, the flat to like a couple,
a professional couple, yeah.
Which is like, I don't think that's ever like really explained because like why she cares. But
what I like about that though is it's such a stupid concept.
Yeah.
And they kind of eschew it for the most part, like almost right away, but then it becomes a running joke where every so often one of them will screw up and say something in front of the landlady, and when she second guesses them, they're like, "Oh shit,"
Yeah, they're like, "Oh shit." But it never becomes like a serious plot point. It never rises to the point where like it's an actual thing.
I just think it's funny that they eschewed it and then it became a running joke.
Yeah, it ends up amounting to like a running gag throughout the show. Like for the most part, it's that whole plot detail is completely unimportant because it only ever rarely comes up.
Yeah, definitely. And when it does, it's just like an instantaneous moment of like, oh crap, I almost got us screwed over, and then it's like already past it at that point.
Right, exactly.
The real strength of the show would just be kind of in the characters and the weird, obscure characters they bring in. Daisy is just kind of like a lazy writer that never gets around anything. Tim is like an aspiring comic book artist.
Tim is like this high-strung, like, nerd, like, he's an aspiring comic artist, but he's like obsessed with his ex-girlfriend, and so like he's got kind of like this dual personality where he come off as like chill and carefree, but then he could be really high strung as well. And you see like there's moments where he just pops off.
It's a little crazy, yeah, definitely. Yeah. And then there's like the supporting characters. There's Marsha, who's like their landlady. She's kind of just like a sad, depressed woman that just kind of inserts herself into other people's lives.
Yeah, she's got like this unruly daughter, and then there's like this other neighbor. They have Brian, who's a starving artist.
He's like the parody of the modern artist, like the artist that is like, what do you like? They always ask him like, what do you do? Like, you're an artist. What do you do? And he's like, pain.
Yeah,
he's
like,
despair, anger,
fear.
Yeah. And it's just kind of like, it's like a parody of like around that time, modern art was like a big thing, and you'd have these modern art galleries where somebody would put up like a painting that was just a black canvas. And they'd say like, oh, this is like such an inspiring piece. And there was like a huge disconnect between like the art community that was like valuing that stuff so highly and the general public that was like, wait a minute, so a black canvas just sold for $1 million? Like, what the fuck?
I love it. Like, there's one episode where like Tim's like asking him to go with them to, I believe it's to go to a club, and he's like I'm working. I'm trying to avoid cliches by not touching the canvas with my brush. So like crazy stuff like that is like this character. And there's a thing where like the landlady like clearly like has a thing with going with Brian because she gets like all like flirty whenever Brian's around.
Yeah, like, well, there's like I don't know how much it's like fully addressed. It's hinted at, but like in a very obvious way, like where it's pretty much out there in the open, but not.
She like flat out like at one point tells Daisy that they've had sex.
Yeah. Well, she said, but even then, she says it like as if it's like a mysterious thing, but she says it like in a way that's obvious, That's what I was getting at. Like, it's like they make it like as if they're playing around the issue, but it's so so painfully obvious they're not
Yeah.
actually doing that, you know? But the idea is that, like, Brian basically, because he's an artist and doesn't make anything, he's basically, like, having sex with her for his rent.
Right, yeah, which is funny.
Yeah. And he's not happy about it.
Yeah.
Every time he's like, she comes by, you can see he gets kind of like nervous and doesn't want to be there. And then every time
you can tell,
she
like,
comes by, she's like, "Where's Brian?"
yeah, you can tell like he's like actively avoiding her like as much as he can.
I think in today's world that would come off like, I don't know if like a character like that would be in a show, or like a situation like that would be in a show. That would be considered kind of maybe over the line.
It's kind of like Marcia is like basically sexually assaulting Brian because she's using her position as the landlady, you know, to kind of assert sexual dominance over him, and he is clearly not a willing participant in this exchange.
Yeah, and that's another thing before we even get onto the other characters, because just stay on whatever tangent we happen to be on.
Yeah.
But there was something I brought up to you, because there was an episode that I was like, at first when the episode started, I'm like, the first thing I was thinking about is like, oh, Will's gonna love this episode, because it's like, because I remember like, oh, it's all about Resident Evil 2.
It's all about like one of my all-time favorite video games. Like they put a heavy emphasis on Resident Evil 2 in this like episode, which is like another thing. Again, like Simon Pegg, like he plays like PlayStation a lot throughout the series, but it's never some fake bullshit game that they made up. Like in our shows, like they'll make up some bullshit video game. It's always like a real video game. Like he's playing like in that episode he was playing Resident Evil 2. Then there's another episode where he's playing like Tomb Raider 3, and then like the last episode I believe like he's playing like Tekken 3. You know, it's always like actual PlayStation video games are real. It's not like some bullshit they made up for a TV show.
Yeah, it's not like Law and Order or Special Victims Unit where they'd make up some weird MMO that makes no sense and looks ridiculous.
Which is like another aspect that kind of gave this show its nerd cred, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's like actual real direct references, real things with that. But, so I initially thought, I'm like, oh, this is what we're going to be talking about with this episode. Now, I'd seen this series before, but it's been like at least 10 years since I've seen it.
I was aware, that there was a Resident Evil episode before this, so I wasn't surprised by references. What I was surprised by was the shocking transphobia.
Yeah. That ended up kind of taking over it. Cause like at first I was like, oh, that's going to be what we're going to talk about with this episode. And then like, I'm like, holy shit. Wow, that was really transphobic. And it kind of reminded me though that like, I never noticed that before.
Because apparently,
and that's just
like,
because of the times, I think, you know, like 20 years ago, like that wouldn't have registered as being.
Yeah, it's kind of like, 20 years ago, like, people weren't as sensitive to those issues, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I saw that, and because, like, in the plot, like, Brian has, like, an ex who is like, they don't come out directly and say it, but it's clearly like his ex is trans.
Yeah.
You know, but like
Volvo is like an art performance artist.
Yeah, but they use that as a springboard for like all these jokes that are like just very transphobic. You know,
I think like Tim says at one point, like, "Oh, what is your ex, a big old she-male or something like that?"
Yeah,
so or tranny, or uses like a slang, you know, like, and that would be like, if somebody said that now, it would be like, holy shit, you know, like that would be like a cancel culture moment, you know,
that would be bad, you know. And I was just like, you know, it kind of like, it for me, like it soured the entire episode. So I was kind of like, I cannot approve. I cannot give that episode my approval. I am sorry. I love you, Simon Pegg, but that was a huge misfire.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. That's why I think the show is interesting to talk about, even if it's kind of dated poorly and stuff, because it dated poorly, because of things like this, you know, like this is the kind of thing that like I wouldn't have batted an eyelid at, you know, 15 years ago or something, which is probably around when I watched it the first time. Wouldn't have like even seen it as like being problematic. Like it wouldn't have even occurred to me. And I watch it now and I'm like cringing, you know? And it just kind of shows like that's, you know, times change. There's things that we're not aware of that you become aware of, you know? And that doesn't mean that those things weren't offensive then. It just means people weren't aware that they were offensive then, you know? Like, there just wasn't representation for trans people. Nobody represented them properly. So there was nobody to say, hey, that's fucked up. And to explain why. Like that just didn't exist in that time, you know? I think if they had made like a gay joke at that point, that probably would have been kind of on the edge at that point. Even then, I remember in that era, people would use like at school commonly would use like the F word and shit like that, you know?
Oh yeah. When I was growing up, that was used all the time by people in school, like.
But even around then, that started to become, people were becoming a bit more aware of how problematic saying that was.
Right. I think there was a lot, I think in the 90s, you know, there was becoming like a lot more, you know, widespread awareness of LGBT like issues.
Yeah,
you
like
know,
Ellen came out, you know, and you had like those kind of big moments like that.
You know, so it's starting to gain more awareness, you know, so.
But trans stuff wasn't even on the map yet.
No.
Like people just had no, like there was no perception that was anything other than ridiculous. I mean, you watch any kind of show from there, there's going to be like jokes about, you know, a man dressed like a woman and coming onto a character and the character going, oh God, no, kind of thing. And
it's
that's
kind of
like a
it's
common trope.
The kind of stuff that like is really like uncomfortable now.
Yeah, yeah. But it's interesting because like I don't blame the people who made this show for this. It just shows that they were ignorant in that period. I don't think anybody who made this show would do anything remotely like that now. It just means that at the time they were ignorant of it. So was I. You know, like I wouldn't have thought that was a bad thing when I first watched this show. It wouldn't have occurred to me that was problematic. But now I look back and I cringe, you know, it's just, we become more aware with times as times change, you know, and if you're not in a group that's like oppressed by some means, then you don't understand their struggle until there's representation for that group.
Right.
And at the time, there just wasn't, so.
Like, I was pretty ignorant as a teenager, you know, regarding anything that was like outside of my personal experience, my personal bubble.
Yeah.
There was a lot of ignorance. Unfortunately.
That's just the nature of time, you know? That's just the nature of time and the way things change and the way we become aware of things and the way things change with that. But I wanted to bring that up when we were talking about things that didn't age well and things that felt uncomfortable and stuff, because that was probably the biggest one in this season that was like that. But maybe the only one that really caught me like that. Can you think I don't think there was anything else that was really, you know,
there wasn't anything else. Yeah, there wasn't anything else that really stood out outside the episode. Thankfully, they didn't bring that character back to continue to make transphobic jokes. So, you know, it's not something that continued past that episode, thankfully.
Well, I don't remember. Maybe in season 2 we're going to see some more.
I don't know. I didn't watch season 2, so I don't know. I'm only speaking to season 1 right now.
Yeah, so who knows? Maybe there is more vulva to come, but I don't know. At the time, there's not. There hasn't been anything else like that, or anything else that's like really that offensive besides that one kind of moment. Let's go on to some of the other kind of characters. We covered Daisy and Tim, Marcia and Brian. The next two I have on my list, the next two kind of prominent characters are Mike and Twist. And so these characters are respectively the friends of the two main characters. Mike is Tim's best friend and Twist is Daisy's best friend. Mike is a lot more relevant to the story of the show. Like Twist is kind of like pretty much a periphery character that shows up.
Twist kind of like gets into like this weird love triangle with like Brian and Marcia, where like Brian's clearly like attracted to Twist and Twist is attracted to him, but Marcia, because of her relationship with Brian, is jealous.
Yeah.
And Marsha's jealous because of her attraction to Brian, even though Brian's not interested in her.
But even that relationship is very, like, it's just kind of on the brink. Like, it looks like something that they'll explore more in season 2, but it's just kind of hinted at here.
Right, yeah, exactly. Even that's not like a huge thing here.
She's not that prominent. The main joke about Twist is that she acts like a fashionista, but she works at a laundromat.
Yeah. Mike is heavily into like military stuff. He's basically like he's basically like one of those like people like a militia person.
But he's the kind of person that always wanted to be in the military, but wasn't able to serve because of a past encounter, which is like another like running gag in the show where they always have like, they hint at this past encounter, and it always has like him and Tim like looking up, and then it kind of transitions like panning up to like two boys, like the two of them as boys sitting in a tree with like funny enough, the guy playing the kid version of Mike has like a mustache. And it's always them talking about like, you know, like it's not your fault that this happened or something, like this huge traumatic moment. And it's played through the entire season, and you eventually find out it's just like, I guess he fell out of the tree and like his retinas were detached or something.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened.
But it's like hinted at through the whole series as like a running gag that like they're like drifting off thinking about it, and then somebody interrupts and they get like taken out of that moment. But yeah, he's kind of like a militia nut. Like, he's obsessed with the military. So like him and Tim will go like, you know, they'll play paintball or they'll do other things. It's all like about that. He dresses like that. He talks all in like operation speak, you know, everything's like whenever Tim, there's a point when he's like, where they're going to like rescue a dog or something, and they put this whole mission together. And Tim's like, you know, he says like, Mike, meet here at 2200 hours. Everybody else 10 p.m. You know?
Yeah.
And that's just kind of like the running joke through the series about Mike, is that he's this, you know, obsessed with the military guy or something. And he's like Tim's best friend. So that's those two characters. Then you kind of have the past relationships which each side have. So on Tim's side, you have his ex-girlfriend, Sarah, who left him for another one of Tim's friends, Dwayne, who stole his ex. And then on Daisy's side, you have her boyfriend, Richard, who's a much smaller presence in the show than Sarah and Dwayne are. In that, right, you pretty much only see him on phone calls, and only like he's in like 3 episodes, I think.
Yeah, he's only like he doesn't show up a lot. He doesn't really factor into the plot much.
The only joke with him is that they're Daisy and Tim are pretending to be a couple while he's in a relationship with Daisy, and he's constantly misconstruing the situation, thinking that maybe Daisy and Tim are actually in a relationship, and he's getting like slightly jealous. And that's kind of like the whole joke with his character. And then like he breaks up with her, and that's it. It's almost a wasted plot line, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then the last kind of notable character is probably Bilbo, who is the guy that owns the comic book shop that Tim works at. It's another actor that if you watch British stuff, you've seen.
Oh, yeah. I've seen that guy before. I don't know if he's a notable character. He shows up like twice and has like very limited dialogue.
He's probably like the last notable character. If anybody else, maybe like Tim's other friend that's like obsessed with raves.
Oh, yeah. Who only shows up for that one episode.
Yeah. There aren't a lot of really notable characters, but it kind of mostly centers on the group of 6 characters, being Daisy, Tim, Marsha, Brian, Mike, and Twist. Those are kind of,
those are the characters.
Vast majority of the time is spent on that group.
Yeah, those are characters who are pretty much in every episode or almost in every episode.
Yeah.
You know.
Besides like the characters and stuff, it's all kind of, it's a sitcom, so it's all like these kind of different situations they wind up in. We'd mentioned there's like that Resident Evil episode with transphobia that happened in it.
Basically the episode was about Brian's ex coming into town with a new art show, and Brian kind of like trying to confront his ex, you know, like with hopes of maybe getting back together, you know, and his ex turning out to be like, you know, like this asshole, basically. And like I said, they're the unfortunate transphobic jokes that make the whole thing completely unwatchable.
Yeah.
And then there's and then there's like the plots where Daisy gets a dog, and
Tim's terrified of dogs. They did a funny bit where they showed the origin of Tim's fear of dogs, where he was being chased by these dogs, and then later on, like she said, "Oh, I always wanted a dog. I was never allowed to have one," and then it shows her flashback, and it was her losing control of a pack of dogs, and it was the same group that were chasing down Tim.
Yeah,
I thought that was
chasing
funny.
After these dogs, yeah, that was like a funny gag, and then apparently like there's a side story where like Tim joins like a paintball like thing with Mike, and like
that's like him basically getting revenge on his friend that stole his girlfriend.
Like, his friend who stole his girlfriend just happens to be there, and they end up like at odds. There's this standoff at the end. And then like there's the episode where Daisy's dog gets kidnapped by like this shadowy like
drug test pharmaceutical company or something, or makeup testing company, something like that.
And so Tim gathers everybody together, and they plan like a heist to rescue the dog.
Yeah, that's the one where I mentioned about the whole time thing, when we were talking about Mike's character being all serialized.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so there's, it's just kind of a sitcom with these little, like, kind of funny, self-contained episodes for the most part with these characters. Lots of geek references, and that's pretty much spaced.
Yeah, that's
what it is. There's a lot of funny, like, cutaway things. One of the things I really liked about this that I had forgotten about is, Edgar Wright is a huge, like, Evil Dead fan. Like, a big fan of, like, Sam Raimi's Evil Dead movie, like, the first one.
Right.
As am I.
And so there's, like, a lot of, like, Sam Raimi type cameras.
Oh yeah, there's like Evil Dead posters in Tim's room. But the main thing is there's a thing, I think it's in the first episode, when
there's like a lot of camera shots that are very Raimi-esque.
Yeah, there's one in particular though, is where like we talked about Marsha's daughter, who she's at odds with. I don't think you ever see Marsha's daughter. You just hear her.
Yeah,
and
you just hear her.
There's one part where you hear her like kind of running across the room, and the kind of camera's like dragging across the ceiling, like following the sound as she's moving and stuff. I think it's like in the first episode. Very Evil Dead. It's like straight out of Evil Dead, like that scene, like the weird camera angle with the sound. There's a few like different angles and stuff too as well, but like I actually saw an interview a couple of years ago with it was Kevin Smith interviewing Edgar Wright, and they were talking like director to director about stuff, and he was talking about how Edgar Wright was talking about how huge Evil Dead was on him, like how that was like the movie that inspired him to become like a director and stuff, and how like it was kind of a movie that was hard to get in the UK. I think it was like banned in the UK or something. Mm-hmm. And so like about how like it was hard for him to find like a copy of the film, and there were like different version cuts where certain things were missing and stuff, and how like obscure it was for him, but how big of a deal it was. So that was a cool thing. I hadn't seen that interview before. I picked up on the references before, but I didn't know just how important Evil Dead was to him before. And as a huge like Sam Raimi Evil Dead fan myself, like that was like watching that now with that context made it like kind of cool.
Right.
So I enjoyed that a lot. Trying to think of some other kind of big things to talk about with the show, but I mean, we've kind of covered most of it.
We covered
what the premises and what's interesting about the show. We needed to bring up the whole transphobia thing because that was kind of crazy.
It's time to wrap it up.
Yeah. So that's it for season 1. We're going to be talking about season 2 next week, and that'll be it for the show because it only ran 2 seasons. But until then, here's what's coming up in the next couple of weeks. So today is Wednesday, July 15th. United We Fall came back to ABC, Dark Desire to Netflix. And then the big thing today is that Peacock launched. This is NBC's streaming service, NBC Universal. So it's got content from NBC, Sci-Fi, USA, all that stuff. Not a great launch. Will and I were talking before the podcast. The app's kind of a mess. The actual like codecs used in the video kind of don't seem to be that great. There's playback problems. There's glitches in the app. The app rollout itself hasn't been that great. Like HBO Max, this app came out without Roku or Fire TV support. Like still doesn't have it. It had like a weird like several hours long delay for the Android version to finally come out out. And when it did, you had to like get a direct link to it rather than just like looking it up on the Play Store. So there's just all sorts of issues with this already. So hopefully they work some of this out. But even if they do work out these kind of technical issues and the kind of just the way the app's laid out and stuff, the interface issues, there's not a lot of content worth checking out on this. Like, I don't know, like people kind of said that, you know, HBO Max didn't have a lot of content, and I kind of thought that was a little bit laughable just because it has all of HBO plus more stuff, and HBO alone is worth the rate, you know, and it doesn't cost more than HBO. If you had like HBO Now, it just transitioned to HBO Max. Peacock, on the other hand, most of their content is like sitcoms that were on Netflix up to like a month ago or something.
You know what? What's annoying is like I wanted to go to the website and check out their catalog, and you can't do that without making an account.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. So there's stuff at the interface, it blocks you off from certain things. There's things you just can't do that you should be able to easily do. Like you can't upgrade to a premium account from within the app. You have to like go to the website outside of it and log in separately from your app into the website to be able to like upgrade your account from the free version. That just seems like a basic level thing that should be there. I understand why it's not, because they don't want to pay the 30% of the monthly revenue that they would have to do for anybody who subscribes through the app. So I understand why they're not doing it, but it just seems kind of petty and like annoying and puts the onus on the user to try to figure out how to do that. And for most people who aren't like tech savvy and stuff, I think that's just going to be a stopping point for them. They're just going to go, oh, I can't do it there. I guess it can't be done. That's going to be most people's reaction to that. So I don't understand why they think that's beneficial to them to do that, even with taking a 30% cut to whatever.
And also, I don't understand why do this. Like they have two premium tiers. So they have the free tier, but then they have Peacock Premium, and then Peacock Premium Plus, which is an additional $5 a month to watch without ads.
This is like, remember when Hulu first started experimenting with it? Hulu did the same thing where they had like, but this is like a little bit different because Hulu was all about ads. Like it was like you'd have lots of ads, some ads, or no ads. That was like their 3 plans.
Yeah. Well, no, they did. So Hulu started out like they had a free tier just like Peacock, and then they had the premium, which still had ads, right? Yeah. So you could do like Hulu Premium or you could watch like a limited amount of content for free, I remember. And then eventually they jettisoned the free tier completely and made like the basic package like, okay, now you have to pay for it. Then they introduced a higher paid tier where they said, okay, you get to watch Hulu now, but with no ads.
Yeah, that might end up being the path that they take, but it just kind of seems like it's a period that Hulu kind of stumbled through, and now like Peacock's coming in embracing it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a little bit weird. It's not unprecedented, but it's weird.
I remember like I signed up for Hulu like almost as soon as it launched, you know?
Yeah. And back when it was mostly the free tier, one of the cool things about Hulu is that you could like embed a clip from a show that you found yourself. I remember that being a cool thing you could do in Hulu back in the day that I don't think you can do anymore at all. No. But you could like set an in point and out point marker on a show that you were watching and then embed that clip into like a website or something. So you could like say, oh, reference a scene from like a show and put that exact clip in that spot. And because of the free tier, that was something you could do because everybody could access it. And I think that's just completely gone now.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so it's weird. Hulu kind of had to stumble through that period, and Peacock's kind of embracing the awkwardness that Hulu got past. But yeah, I mean, even when you get past those kind of surface level issues too, there's all sorts of issues with the content, the codecs, the playback, everything, and the library. I mean, you can set stuff to your watch list, but you can't access your watch list. Like there's nowhere to access it. So there's just weird shit like that. Like it just doesn't make sense. It's not a really well thought out service yet. This is probably the worst streaming service launch outside of Quibi, you know, as far as like just being kind of not really working that well and stuff. So hopefully they get their act together. The one thing that's on there that I really desperately want to watch is Psych 2, which is the second Psych spin-off movie. I loved Psych and I can't wait to see the movie for it, the second one. But that was something that was originally supposed to be on USA and was like co-opted by Peacock. So we would have gotten this months ago because that's when it was supposed to come on USA months ago. So even in that sense, Peacock's kind of a deterrent, not something helpful. It was something that was going to come anyways. So it's still not really offering us anything worthwhile.
Right, no.
But the shows that launched on Peacock today were Brave New World, The Capture, Intelligence, and as I mentioned, Psych 2. Tomorrow, Thursday, July 16th, 30 Rock is having their Upfront special on NBC. I think we talked about this last week, but basically Upfronts was like a private event that you would hold to like get advertisers on board. Like networks would have this as a private event. They'd show what their new shows were. They'd have these really long trailers that kind of gave away the entire show. And the entire point was to get advertisers to go, oh, okay, this is a show I can advertise on. And there's no upfronts this year, obviously, because of no like actual conference upfronts because of COVID-19.
Well, there's an interesting story behind this because apparently I read that the local NBC affiliates, which control like half of the nation's NBC stations, are revolting and they are refusing to air this. They will not air this upfront special. So half the country will not even see this on their local NBC station. And the reason being is because the local affiliates or the biggest affiliates are upset because they see this upfront special as just a blatant promotion for Peacock.
Which they see as like a way of NBC saying, you don't have to have cable anymore because you can get your NBC through Peacock.
Yeah, it's basically like it's basically now the affiliates believe that they're being circumvented and abandoned.
Which they will be. All of them will be. And I don't just mean NBC's. I mean everybody's. That's just the way things are going.
Yeah.
You know, that's just that's the future. That's the path everything's taking. But that's, you know, of course, a big company that relies on that revenue stream as it is right now. Instead of experimenting and finding new ways to survive in the business, they're just going to swing their arms around wildly and complain and then block people from watching things like this.
Yeah.
Act like big babies. But, anyways, what this is it's like an upfront special. They're bringing the cast of 30 Rock together again, and it's going to be almost like a little mini episode of 30 Rock that doubles as a special to show like what's content is coming up on NBC and Peacock.
Yeah, we explained this in the last episode. It's basically a meta joke with 30 Rock, and they're doing some cute upfront thing.
But yeah, so it's kind of a weird story with that stuff. That all ties back into Peacock, which we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Peacock, the biggest disaster of 2020. No, not really. Also coming out on Thursday is The Secret She Keeps on Sundance Now. On Friday, July 17th, Absentia comes to Amazon Prime. Cursed comes to Netflix. That's the Arthurian legend story that follows the lady in the lake that was based on a graphic novel by Frank Miller. Mm-hmm. So, that might be worth checking out, not sure. And Kissing Game comes to Netflix, which is a foreign series about a disease spreading by kissing, which happens to be coming out now, of all times. Yeah. On Sunday, July 19th.
It's a series about a disease spreading by kissing with Donald Trump telling people to go out and kiss everybody they can and to drink bleach.
Drink bleach and then share it in your mouth with the people you kiss. On Sunday, July 19th, The Alienist Angel of Darkness comes to TNT. This is a spin-off of the Alienist series that has already been on TNT. On Monday, July 20th, 12 Ounce Mouse comes to Adult Swim. The Andy Cohen Diaries comes to Quibi, and Die Hard comes to Quibi.
Okay, but nobody cares about Quibi, so.
Oh, I thought that was your favorite service.
Nobody cares. Nobody's watching it. Nobody's gonna watch that stuff.
So we should say, temporarily comes to Quibi before it's eventually licensed to another streaming service when Quibi is shut down.
Yeah, exactly.
On Tuesday, July 21st, How to Sell Drugs Online Fast returns to Netflix. On Wednesday, July 22nd, Norseman returns to Netflix. This is a really funny show. It's kind of like, if you've ever seen the show Vikings, it's almost like a parody of Vikings, but actually made in it's like made in like Norway or something. So it's like actually like a show from Norway about Vikings, but like a parody. It's pretty funny. Signs comes to Netflix as well. On Thursday, July 23rd, Tacoma FD returns to True TV. This is the people behind Super Troopers. It's a TV show. It's kind of like Super Troopers, but with firemen instead of cops. But it's been on before, so it's coming back. On Friday, July 24th, Room 104, the anthology series, returns to HBO. Kind of another like Twilight Zone-esque series. On Sunday, July 26th, Helter Skelter miniseries comes to Epix. Winona Earp returns to Sci-Fi. And lastly, on Monday, July 27th, Don't Look Deeper comes to Quibi, which is that show's title should be the explanation for what the Quibi's executives tell their stock investors.
Don't look deeper. Don't worry, nobody's looking at all. So
that's what Meg Whitman and Katzman say to their investors when the investors are like, "But what else do you have?" They say, "Don't look deeper."
Don't look deeper.
So that show, Don't Look Deeper? No, we're just telling you, don't look deeper. There's nothing there. But that's it. That's what's coming up in the next couple of weeks. As I mentioned, next week we're going to be talking about season 2 of Space. Until then, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Tyson Gifford. You can follow Will. He is at Voxel Hero. You can check out our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, as well as our site, thetotalscreen.com. You can subscribe to this podcast through any major podcast client like iTunes or Pocket Cast, and the entire backlog of our podcast is available on our YouTube channel. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Good night.
Good night.
If you would like to reach out to us and make a comment, send an email to contact@thetotalscreen.com. Stay tuned to The Total Screen for the very best in genre television.